Here we are with James Marsh. Your latest documentary is Project NIM, about a celebrated, I wanted to say notorious chimpanzee, but celebrated is really the word for it, James. And it's such an odd, sad story. It starts almost like a black comedy, and it descends into this very sort of tragic set of circumstances. How did you get involved with this after doing Man on a Wire, which I guess you won an Academy Award for, about the Philippe Petit? Yes.
Well, interesting question. Specifically, the story comes from a book that the producer Simon Chin, who worked on Man on Wire as well, encountered. And Elizabeth Hess wrote the book, and she rather brilliantly discovered, this whole life story of an animal that she told in her book. And so when I read the book, I was gripped by this story and the surprising, unexpected twists and turns of this life story of a chimpanzee. So, and I was very interested in the challenge of trying to, devote a film to the life story of an animal as opposed to a biography of a person, but using some of the same kind of techniques and ideas. So it became a very, very interesting challenge to try and see if I could do this, to pull this off, to tell you this one animal's story, this animal that lived with us, was a guest in our world to some extent.
And it can't speak, but was celebrated as being somebody who could communicate with humans.
The idea of the Nim, the chimpanzee, comes to us as part of a language experiment. The idea is that they're going to try and bring up a baby chimpanzee as if it were a human child, and hope that the chimp can learn language in that social setting that we learn language in. So he's taught American Sign Language, the language the deaf community uses. So he can't speak, but he can communicate, and they're giving him these very specific tools to communicate, and this is how the story starts. And as you know, that's just the beginning of a long, epic narrative.
It's 1974 that he's born.
He's born in 1973, the end of 1973.
And he's taken from his mother at an animal care facility in Oklahoma.
Yeah.
He's
snatched from his mother. It's not taken.
Is it like 2 days or after?
He's 2 weeks.
2 weeks after he's born.
And so he's and it's like an abduction. And any time you take a baby away from its mother, it should feel transgressive, and indeed it is. So he's taken from his chimpanzee mother and given to a human mother to bring up as if he were a human child.
And that is here on the Upper West Side in New York City. It's a Columbia University project run by a man by the name of Herb Terrace, who turns out to have slept with many of the people that he hires to take care of Nim.
Yeah, I'm not sure how many, and that wouldn't be
two, I think, at least. Yes,
indeed.
And Herb is the person that seems to make this sort of a comedy. Because the woman that he gives it to, she has just married a man with 4 children. She has, I think, 2 or 3 of her.
3 of her own. Yes.
And so he is brought into this family in a New York household, but we find out that as a scientific experiment, it's a joke. They have no records. The chimp is running wild.
Well, I'm not sure it's a joke. I think what happens is that Stephanie tries to be a mother to the chimpanzee, and that being a mother seems to preclude some of the duties that she's been given as a scientist, which is endlessly documenting everything he does and recording everything. So she rebels against that, and it becomes quite a sort of point of conflict and tension in the story when she doesn't want to go along with the sort of rigours of the experiment because she feels it's not good for the chimpanzee. She's acting like a mother more than a scientist. I'm not sure that she can be reproached for that, but given it's a scientific experiment, there are other imperatives, shall we say, and then the story, as you know, takes another dramatic turn when Nim is sort of taken from her quite forcefully.
The same way Nim was taken from its own mother.
Indeed, that will be true. Yeah. So and then Nim has a series of other relationships with people that don't always end up very well either.
But it's amazing how the women feel so protective and close to him.
It's heroic in a way. I think to be given an alien species to nurture and to try and do it so fully that they all do, despite the fact that he's an alien species, and despite the fact that as he gets bigger and stronger, he becomes quite a handful, to say the least.
He bites them, he scratches them,
yeah.
and you make the point of saying...
And tries to hump them as well.
And when he gets to be 150 pounds, he's going to have the strength of 5 times...
That's a pretty standard definition of a chimp's strength, is they're 5 times... That's the power of a fully grown male human being.
And over this, I think hovering over your movie then, is the awareness that people have of the incident that happened a couple of years ago where the woman was attacked by a chimpanzee who ripped off her face.
Indeed, yeah.
And took it nearly, severed limbs and went berserk, and about how dangerous these animals are. So when we first see Nim in the home with these little children and the little cat that he befriends, the potential for violence is always sort of right there.
Well, it's hardwired into chimpanzees. So it's not just Nim. It's a kind of instinctive behaviour. We have the same. You know, we're hardly a sort of peaceful, peace-loving species ourselves. But you're right. I think that very public, very well-known incident has kind of somewhat shaped or redefined our perception of chimpanzees to be more accurate, to be honest with you, because they are potentially violent. We're putting this chimpanzee in a very unusual set of circumstances. You know, in the wild, they wouldn't be living in a house and wearing diapers and hanging out with people. They would be doing their own thing. So the context that he's put in is so extraordinary, unusual. His behaviour is actually quite normal.
I remember, as I thought, watching the movie, about all the Tarzan movies. They came out with a book in England, I think, last year called Me, Cheetah.
Indeed, yeah. I didn't read
the
it,
mock biography
yeah.
of Cheetah, the chimpanzee,
yeah.
yes, who was in the Tarzan movies. And
yeah.
I remember all of the Tarzans through the years, starting with Johnny Weissmuller in the 30s, would talk about that damn chimp biting them and scratching them, and how they hated having to work with them because they were so... they weren't cuddly, sweet little things.
They are to start off with, like human children, but certainly as they get older, that they have a culture of dominance, and they test you, and if you're a male chimpanzee, you don't dominate them one day and then that's all going to be fine for the rest of your time with them. You do it every day. There's a test every day. There is kind of this potential for conflict, as you see in the film.
Well, people talk about Nim's almost psychic ability, like an alien from outer space with superior intelligence, to know exactly who was afraid of him and what people's reaction to him when he would come in contact with them. Also, you mentioned Stephanie trying to mother him. She had just gotten into this marriage with this man who had 4 children, and Nim hated that guy.
Yes, well, he had a sort of, again, an instinctive concern about any larger male in his life. And as you see in the film, he becomes very disruptive in that household. He picks on Stephanie's husband, Will Lafarge, who's a poet and not really that interested in interacting with a chimpanzee, and he begins to kind of humiliate him.
Ripping his books apart in the library.
Yes, going for his weeks. Well, he's a poet, and so his books are very valuable to him, and Nim knows that straight away. I mean, Nim understands what money is. He doesn't know what it does, but if I were to get out, like $1, he would know that had some value to me, and would then want to take it off me. They have an extraordinarily good read of our body language, and as you say, it's often they know exactly if you're frightened of them, and you wouldn't last 5 minutes if that was the case.
Now, Herb Terrace is the man who is responsible for bringing Nim to New York for the Columbia University project and then for ending it. And he's sort of the puppet master pulling the strings for the first 5 years of Nim's life in this world. I thought he seemed to be kind of a jerk. Sort of a mockery of the academic, and that's where I kept thinking somebody could remake this material into a comedy. It's just ridiculous. But at the same time, once he ends the project and Nim goes back to the animal care facility in Oklahoma, I mean, it's like something out of Les Miserables or Victor Hugo or something. He's thrown into virtually a dungeon, and then he's sentenced to be experimented on as an animal subject, just like any other chimp, and they use an electric prod to control him.
Well, Well, there's lots of ideas in that question.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what the question was, but I wouldn't pass judgment on anyone in this film in that way. That's not my job in a way.
No, you don't. You keep a very neutral
indeed,
distance.
but I'm interested in what people